I'm Dalsimer. I'm running for Congress in Virginia's 11th, and this is my foreign policy gauntlet. And now I'm going to talk about the conflict between Israel and Palestine. The Israelis and Palestinians have a long history of conflict. It's a complicated situation. The most recent issue, however, is that the Israeli government is systematically and forcibly displacing Palestinians from their homeland in the Gaza Strip. This is widely perceived as an illegal action. And when the Palestinians retaliated, the Israelis came down with disproportionate force, bombing civilian targets, including a hospital and a press building. And this is just unacceptable. It is a very lopsided conflict, and one that the U.S. has really exacerbated by selling arms to Israel. Israel already has a robust Air Force, Navy, and Army. The Palestinians have no Navy or Air Force and an Army that's much smaller. And the reality is that by arming one side and taking sides in a conflict where there's clearly some illegal activities, the U.S. has made this situation much worse than it had been. Going forward, what I think needs to happen is that first and foremost, we have to stop selling arms to Israel. They don't need them. Second, I think we need to seriously consider sanctions or other diplomatic maneuvers with respect to the occupation of the West Bank. And third, and most importantly, we have to provide humanitarian assistance because people are truly, truly suffering. And going forward, I think we need to focus on the fact that all peoples need to live with peace and security and dignity, no matter where they live and no matter what their personal circumstances are. Department of Defense audit. Would I support and fight for it? Yes, absolutely. In 2018, the DODIG, the Inspector General, did an audit, which was not completed, but found that $21 trillion was simply missing and unaccounted for. 21 trillion, 6.5 trillion of that in 2015 alone. That's not okay. These are public dollars. We need transparency and we need accountability. So I understand the task is extremely hard, and I think perhaps some people may not realize why it's so hard. But DoD is the largest employer in the nation with 3 million employees. Installations are literally small cities. You have schools, hospitals, housing, as well as all of the military-related testing, training, and operational activities. So it's a very monumental task, and it will not be easy. But that doesn't mean it's not worthwhile. Like I said, this is taxpayer dollars, and they should be accounted for, and the American people should know how their money is being spent, especially when you're looking at trillions of dollars. Military spending. The 2021 budget for the military was $778 billion, more than the next 11 countries combined, which was $761 billion. 10% of all our funds and 50% of the government's discretionary funds go to support the military. This is huge, and it's unnecessary. Every year, Department of Defense sends a budget request to Congress, and every year, Congress adds money and responsibilities to that budget and sends it back. And there are a couple of consequences of this. First, you have so I worked within the Department of Defense for 22 years, and what we have is mission creep, which means that the mission keeps expanding. So Congress adds 10 or 20 billion dollars and then says, well, you also need to do these additional activities. And the result is you have things like Army personnel digging wells in Africa. That is not a military mission relevant activity. That's something USAID or something else should be doing. The second consequence is that because they have more money than they can use, there is a huge excess in the budget. So you've got $7.4 billion going into the military to civilian law enforcement since 1990. And I actually pulled up some stats. So since 1990 and through May 2020, the Pentagon has funneled 391 fixed-wing aircraft and helicopters, 2,885 Humvees, 1,105 mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles, MRAPs, which are little tanks, and more than 75,000 firearms to federal and state police forces across the country. Both of these consequences are unacceptable and unnecessary. My plan would be to allow military leaders to really take a hard look at what their activities are, refocus and repurpose so that they can redefine their mission essential activities and present a budget that includes those activities, and that Congress should fund it at that level, allowing the excess that will be taken out to go back into the other agencies like the State Department and USAID, because those agencies have been gutted. In addition to which, I think we need to make sure that we disallow Congress to profit from the military-industrial complex. And what I mean by that is there is an incentive for folks in Congress, representatives in Congress, who own stocks in companies that profit from war, because they themselves will profit from armed conflicts. For example, the current representative in my district I think he has $488,000 worth of investments in companies that profit from war. This is a perverse incentive that leads to overfunding the agency, overfunding DOD, because there's a return on that investment in a personal way. And I think that has to stop. Would I like to see nuclear weapons banned? Yes. Emphatically, yes. And I'll tell you why. Because if even a single nuclear bomb was detonated in a populated area, millions of people would be instantly killed. People 5 miles away would suffer third-degree burns, and people over 50 miles away would be blinded. This is unacceptable. And if there was a full-fledged nuclear war, it would result in what they call mutually assured destruction, which basically means the human race would be annihilated. We would cease to exist. If not from the immediate effects of the nuclear attack, from the environmental holocaust that would follow. This planet would literally become unlivable for humans. I understand the concerns. I understand the thought that just the existence of having nuclear weapons leads to some sort of stability. I understand that there are countries that are continuing to add to their arsenals, their nuclear arsenals, China, North Korea, etc. I understand that assuring that there is compliance with treaties is difficult. I understand that dismantling is problematic and that there's nothing we really know what to do with the waste yet. I get all those things, but those are just obstacles, and we have to focus on the goal. My plan would be to absolutely re-engage fully with the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, to work globally to implement and fully verify disarmament. And I think we really need to fund research into the true climate impacts of having a nuclear war. Because I think if people really saw what that would mean, they would be much less likely to support continuing having a nuclear program. And now I'm going to talk about the idea of implementing a war tax, and do I support it? I understand the argument of allowing people to see the true cost of war and to feel it directly in their pockets. My concern is that taxing people, many of whom are really already struggling, is probably not the best way to go about it, especially when you consider how we end up in wars. I think what we really need to understand is that, similar to the death penalty, which is supposed to deter murders but does not, because murders are crimes of passion more often than not, having a war tax I don't think would deter us going to war. I think we all saw in 9/11 that, Barbara Lee aside, it was a knee-jerk retaliatory act that was taken with relatively little thought or planning. In the end, Congress is going to do what it wants, because I'm not really sure most congressional representatives, or at least not a lot of congressional representatives, really understand what's going on with their constituents or how they feel. They think they know better. So I'm not sure a war tax would do what it sets out to do, and I'm concerned that it might hurt working people who are already struggling. I do have a thought on that, though. My proposal would be to disallow war profiteering at all levels. So if you're a company who produces planes for commercial air traffic, you could certainly make a profit. And if that same company is making a plane to be a fighter jet, you would not be allowed to make a profit from that. You certainly would not have to do a loss, but you would have to do it at cost. So the American people did not pay for profit to that company. This would have a trickle effect because that means stockholders would not gain dividends or profits. And I think if you take away the profit incentive, which is a perverse incentive that completely messes up healthcare, education, the criminal justice system, and war, I think we would see Congress people a lot less interested in declaring war. Ending forever wars. Do I support ending forever wars? Absolutely, yes, 100%. I think war needs to be a last resort, not a first response. And as I just mentioned, I think there should be no profit motive in going to war because it creates a perverse incentive that makes us as a country end up in wars, especially forever wars, because there are forever profits associated with that. I think if we are going to go to war, we must first very specifically define what the triggers are after exhausting all non-conflict approaches, diplomacy, sanctions, etc. I think that if we can prove there is a real and imminent threat to American lives and properties, that we should then develop a strategy that identifies exactly why we're going to war and what the end will look like, what a success or win will look like. So basically, we would develop what's called a POAM in the business world, a plan of action and milestones, where you have a periodic review that identifies your specific targets to achieving success and decides at each of those points whether you're at a go or no-go decision. So perhaps that's every 2 months or 4 months or whatever is decided, but you need to continually review whether or not being at war is still achieving your goals and if it's still the approach, because there are lives, not just of American soldiers, but of people around the world at risk, and that needs to be taken very seriously. The bottom line is that the U.S. has got to stop being the world's largest arms dealer. Right now, 1/3 of all weaponry around the globe comes from the U.S. I think we have to invest in diplomacy over violence. We've got to stop overfunding DoD. We have to restore funding to the State Department and USAID. And I think as a core principle to our foreign policy, we must go on the basis of achieving peace and security and dignity for the American people and for all peoples around the globe.